Hello, I'm Father Anthony Cekada. It looks like 2016 will turn out to be a banner year among traditionalists for arguing over the question of the Pope and its relation to the continuing crisis in the post-Vatican II Church. First, there will be the ongoing antics of Bergoglio, aka Francis, the People's Pope, and his theology of surprises. You never know what he'll do next. Second, we will hear a lot of back and forth over true or false Pope. A 700-page book by John Salsa and Robert Sisko attacking the school of thought among traditionalists known as Sedevacantism. Sedevacantism maintains that the post-Vatican II popes either lost their authority through public heresy or never obtained papal authority in the first place. Messrs. Salsa and Sisko, on the other hand, adhere to the R&R position. This holds that all traditionalists must recognize the post-Vatican II popes, but are nevertheless free to resist all their teachings, laws, and rites. Messrs. Salsa and Sisko have been promoting their book through various traditionalist outlets that adhere to the R&R position. Michael Matt's The Remnant, John Venari's Catholic Family News, and sites like Louis Verrocchio's aka Catholic. The R&R camp has used the book to launch a full-fledged offensive against Sedevacantism and Sedevacantists. It's certainly open season on me. R&R partisans had already published 6 anti-Cekada articles by mid-January. Bishop Bernard Fallet's Society of St. Pius X, the premier R&R organization in the world, bankrolled the Salsa-Sisko book and acclaims it as luminous. Bishop Fallet even wrote the preface. Messrs. Salsa and Sisko, naturally, are stalking horses for the Society of St. Pius X, which doesn't want to get burned in a firefight over the issue, especially by ex-SSPXers like Bishop Donald Sanborn and me. But I'm afraid SSPX will have no choice. The organization has been pushing its erroneous teaching on the papacy since its very foundation in the 1970s. Messrs. Salsa and Sisko are merely the newest members of the SSPX Recognize and Resist marketing team. Unlike R&R, Sedevacantism maintains intact all the traditional Catholic doctrine on the office of the papacy, its threefold authority to teach, rule, and sanctify, and the obligation of each and every Catholic to submit to the Pope. We hold that Catholics are now in the same situation that existed between the death of one Pope and the election of another. Then, as now, while the office of the papacy as established by Christ continues to exist, there is no true and living Pope who occupies it, no living vicar of Christ on earth. If there were, as Catholics we would be bound by the divine law to be subject to him. And here we encounter what may seem like a curious irony. Conservative Novus Ordo Catholics and Sedevacantists fundamentally adhere to the same traditional Catholic doctrine on the Pope. A Pope possesses the supreme authority on earth to teach, rule, and sanctify. And when he does, Catholics are obliged to submit to him. In contrast, the R&R argument begins not with principles derived from the standard Catholic theology of the papacy, but rather originates in two primitive myths invented on the fly in the traditionalist movement during the 1960s and reverently handed down in tribal lore ever since. First, without the rare once-in-a-century infallible stamp on a pronouncement, Catholics are free to ignore what the Pope teaches or decrees. And second, that a Catholic can treat the Pope pretty much like a bad dad. In the first days of the traditionalist movement, those few faithful priests who brought the Mass and Catholic doctrine to the scattered faithful tried to figure out a way around the established rules that would have rendered their ministry a wildcat operation. Some figured, sensibly enough, that a great deal of the old legislation, even though it had been approved by pre-Vatican II popes, could not possibly be binding under the circumstances because it would end up being harmful. So far, so good. Indeed, that reflects a general principle in canon law called intrinsic cessation. But then the larger question eventually arose. What about Paul VI? What about the Pope? He approved all the changes you're rejecting. How do you square claiming to be a Catholic with ignoring the Pope? Look at the picture. Think of what it represents. How can you go up against that? And it is here that the R&R myths came into play. They were very appealing because they were simple. And when they began to be applied in practice across the board, they slowly and completely changed the attitude of countless individual traditionalists toward the papacy and the person of the Pope. Unlike the sedevacantist position, which holds that the post-Vatican II popes either lost their authority in one fell swoop through public heresy, or for that reason never obtained it in the first place, the R&R position evolved into a perpetual, continuous exercise in private judgment over every blessed thing the supposed Roman pontiff says or does, day in and day out, for nearly 50 years. In fact, the most amusing and hypocritical charge that Salsa, Cisco, and SSPX make against sedevacantism is that we are like Protestants and guilty of private judgment. For us, the conclusion that we draw, there is no Pope, is a one-shot deal. But come on, gentlemen, when it comes to what your Pope says, you're banging down your gavel every day. You determine which papal teachings, laws, sacramental rites, or commands are good, very few of course, and which you'll reject, resist, ignore, or publicly denounce. Just about everything else. Under R&R, a pope no longer possesses the supreme authority to bind and loose on earth. Instead, the Superior General of SSPX, the editors of the Remnant and Catholic Family News, Fatima Industry Impresarios, moonlighting tax lawyers and mortgage brokers like Messrs. Salsa and Cisco, and generally any traditional Catholic whatsoever, including each person in the crowd at this SSPX ordination, does the final review for His Holiness. So, the new Mass of Paul VI? Sacrilege, intrinsically evil. The Mass of Luther, not binding, or the Pope didn't promulgate it correctly anyway. The Pope's teaching on ecumenism? Scandalous. Poke fun at it in cartoons. Consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart? The Pope didn't do it right. The Pope's new catechism? It destroys the faith. We call it the catechism. The Vatican declares Archbishop Lefebvre suspended or excommunicated? Invalid, no matter what the Pope and his curious say. Consecrate bishops against the Pope's explicit will? Necessity lets me do it. The Pope can't excommunicate tradition. Operation Survival. Don't like the current vicar of Jesus Christ on earth? Publicly organize a campaign for his resignation. Follow the Pope's 1983 Code of Canon Law? Pick only the bits we like, that we think are in conformity with tradition. Accept annulments from the marriage tribunals that have authority from the Pope? Sure, but we have the final say. Recognize the Pope's canonizations? Only for the good saints, not for bad saints, and especially not for way, way bad saints. And so on, and so on, and so on, for nearly 50 years. Every day, in every way, every traditionalist becomes a Pope checker. Who needs to visit the throne of Peter? You give the final thumbs up or thumbs down from your easy chair. The Pope speaks, but you decide. He is no longer Peter, but you are Peter. How's that for a false Pope? We sedevacantists have repeatedly pointed out why such notions simply cannot be reconciled with what traditional Catholic theology teaches about the authority of the Pope. But beyond that, these stock-and-trade R&R bromides utterly destroy the respect and reverence Catholics ought to have towards a true and living successor of Peter. Those of us raised before Vatican II took reverence towards the Pope and submission to him as a given. Yes, even that little future troublemaker in the front row. It was imparted to us in catechism classes, sermons, apologetics books, and Catholic periodicals. If the Pope spoke, by God we listened, and we obeyed. But the several generations of traditionalist priests and laymen initiated into the R&R mythology by SSPX, The Remnant, and Catholic Family News don't have a real or a living Pope. They have instead a cardboard one. Sure, his photo is in the vestibule of all SSPX chapels, and the Remnant and company yammer on about the need to recognize him. But do any of them actually heed his teaching? For them, the Pope might as well be one of those life-size celebrity cutouts in the aisles at Walmart, programmed to chatter at passers-by, who can heed or ignore its message at will. The Pope chatters, but you decide. Sure, you claim you're on his team, and he's on yours. But if you don't think what he is selling is on your shopping list for tradition, just breeze by him to your own self-checkout lane. Still worse, those who have really bought into R&R treat the idea of respect and submission toward the Pope with contempt. Papolatry, as in idolatry, is the word one encounters on R&R internet forums. And now, the traditionalist tribal myths planted long ago have blossomed into ridicule of the man R&R insists is truly the vicar of Christ on earth. A few days ago, I posted a short article about Bergoglio's recent video for the Apostleship of Prayer. This put Buddhism, Talmudic Judaism, Christianity, and Islam on the same footing. It was produced in Spanish with English subtitles. Its message was utterly revolting, complete apostasy. Well, someone in the R&R camp got the idea to change the English subtitles in order to mock Bergoglio and his ecumenical idiocies. I enjoy the esteem of men, honoring their false gods. After all, isn't Jesus Christ just one among many? The parody video, since removed for copyright reasons, quickly got over 8,000 hits. It was very, very funny, and of course utterly on point. But step back. If you adhere to the R&R line and believe Bergoglio is a real pope, you are mocking and laughing at the vicar of Jesus Christ on earth. What sort of person who claims to be a faithful Catholic would engage in such mockery? Well, an R&R blogger like Louis Verrecchio. He was the one, not some sedevacantist villain, who put together this parody to mock his pope. And Mr. Verrecchio put it up a few weeks after posting the cozy promotional interview he arranged with Messrs. Salza and Cisco for their book. And here's another sample of Mr. Verrecchio's wit. Here he is mocking his pope by depicting him as the Godfather. And 2 months later, here's Mr. Verrecchio giving an SSPX-sponsored conference on Vatican II. Am I tarring Messrs. Salsa, Cisco, and the SSPX with guilt by association? Absolutely. The R&R myths that Salsa, Cisco, SSPX, The Remnant, Catholic Family News, and the rest promote reduce the role of a pope to a joke. The pope speaks, you decide, even to mock him if you want. Thanks to all of you, the Catholic doctrine on the papacy, as the Godfather might have said, sleeps with the fishes. Mr. Salsa claims to be a former Mason. He would therefore be well aware that his 19th century Masonic brethren of the Alta Vendita looked forward one day to a pope who would be a, quote, revolution in tiara and cope, marching with cross and banner to set the four corners of the earth on fire. There is no question that Jorge Mario Bergoglio is the man for the job. He is a modernist revolutionary who would bring the papacy down, to reduce it to nothing more than being mere Bishop of Rome, to be a cipher, a symbol, a mere primacy of honor. And that is exactly what R&R for nearly 50 years has striven to reduce it to, a papacy with no point, centering on a chattering cardboard figure, surrounded by an army of pope checkers who are the real deciders. Messrs. Salsa and Cisco, and the SSPX, in other words, are in the procession and holding the cope for the Masons and the Modernists' chief revolutionary, while recognizing and resisting their way straight to the destruction of the very papacy itself. For in their twisted theology, the Pope is not Peter, but you are.